The Thulrexian Empire, the undisputed force of the galaxy, had never encountered a foe it couldn't subdue. For centuries, it had consumed entire civilizations, crushed rebellions, and silenced any whispers of defiance. The Empire's supremacy was absolute. Yet in the silence of deep space, something had shifted. The first disturbance came as a mere blip on Imperial sensors. At the outer rim, where even the Thulrexians rarely ventured, something had emerged, an anomaly impossible to categorize. A scouting fleet was dispatched to investigate the sector known as 117K, a barren stretch of space the Empire had once marked off as a dead zone, a place devoid of any worthwhile resources. Nothing moved there except the occasional asteroid or passing cosmic radiation. The fleet, under the command of Admiral Valor Keth, was confident in its mission. Keth had led countless operations in hostile territories and faced down insurgents from every corner of the galaxy. This would be another quick recon, a mere formality. But within hours of arriving in Sector 117K, his fleet began to encounter unexplained disturbances, flickering energy patterns, warped star readings, and gravitational anomalies that could only be described as unnatural. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the anomaly vanished, and so did the fleet. One moment, the scout ships were transmitting data. The next, they were gone. No distress signal, no debris, just nothing. It was as though they had simply never existed. Keth's flagship, the Vindicator, was the last to remain in the sector. The remaining crew had continued searching, trying to decipher what had happened to the others, but each sensor reading was more confusing than the last. The fleet's last transmission sent an image across the void, a fleeting ghost of something impossibly large and angular. Metallic ships rising from the very fabric of space, like colossal predators appearing from the deep. The image was fragmented, but the word that echoed through the static was chilling. Terran. The transmission ended abruptly. Back in Imperial Command, the reports were dismissed. Scans of the system showed no indication of anything out of the ordinary. Admiral Keth's disappearance was put down to technical malfunction or sabotage. No one had ever heard of the word Terran in the Empire's history books. Surely the reports were exaggerated. But beneath the surface of the Empire's bureaucratic calm, an unsettling feeling began to grow. The thought lingered in the back of Imperial minds, buried but never forgotten. What if this was something new, something they couldn't control? Far from the prying eyes of the Empire, humanity had built something unimaginable, something the galaxy had long forgotten. In secret, hidden deep within the fabric of space, the Terran Accord had been born. After Earth's collapse in the 22nd century, humanity had splintered, but from the ashes of the old world, a new, unified force arose. The Terrans had spent centuries perfecting their technologies, all the while under the cloak of isolation, watching the stars with a sense of both curiosity and dread. They were not explorers. They were survivors. Unlike the Empire, which expanded its influence with brute force, humanity's rise was born of necessity, not conquest. The first Terran warships were forged not to subjugate, but to defend against those who would seek to erase them. An eventuality that had always lingered in their collective memory, as their ancestors had once faced extinction on their homeworld. They had seen civilizations fall. They had learned from the mistakes of others. And now, they were ready. The Terran fleet wasn't just a collection of ships. It was a new kind of war-born species. The fleet itself was alive. Each vessel, an engineered organism, a hybrid of biological and mechanical parts, powered by advanced sentient AIs that could think, feel, and evolve. Their hulls were woven with self-healing alloys, their weapon systems based on principles that had once been thought impossible. Zero-point energy, subspace manipulation, and quantum displacement fields. These were not just machines. They were living, breathing entities, tied to their commanders and their crew. The Terrans had hidden these war vessels in the deep corners of the galaxy, knowing that one day the Empire's gaze would turn toward them. and when it did, they would be ready. Admiral Ilara Voss, the commander of the Terran flagship Apocalypse, stood on the bridge of her vessel, gazing out into the endless expanse. She was the product of a lifetime spent in preparation, her mind sharpened by years of training in military tactics, her heart hardened by the knowledge that her people had been hunted once before and would never allow themselves to be hunted again. "Activate Protocol Leviathan," she commanded, her voice steady but filled with purpose. Across the fleet, the same order was echoed, and like a living beast, the Terran armada stirred from the shadows. The time had come to reveal their existence, and with it, the sheer might of their technological superiority. Hundreds of warships, each one more terrifying than the last, emerged from the hidden folds of space, fully equipped for a war the Empire had never imagined. The warships materialized from nothing, their shimmering hulls gleaming under the light of distant stars. The galaxy's silence was broken, and in the heart of the Phyrexian Empire, a chill ran down the spines of those who had once believed themselves to be invincible. The Terran nightmare had arrived. The Phyrexian Empire had always viewed itself as the undisputed authority of the galaxy. Its fleets were unmatched, its technologies unparalleled. Nothing had ever stood in their way, and nothing had ever needed to. Until now. In the wake of the strange disappearance of the Scout fleet, Imperial High Command issued a response, one that was as swift as it was forceful. A diplomatic envoy was dispatched to the mysterious sector where the Terran ships had reportedly appeared. The Phyrexian government believed that a show of force, a simple display of their superior power, would be enough to intimidate these unknown entities into submission. The imperial diplomat, Valtros Zim, was a seasoned negotiator, renowned for his ability to diffuse even the most volatile situations. He was confident that the Terrans, whoever they were, would see the inevitability of the Empire's dominance. His mission was to meet them in peace, perhaps to establish some form of tribute or submission. But he had little idea that the very act of meeting would be the catalyst for something far darker. Zim's ship, the Crestfall, arrived in the Sol system, its sensors immediately detecting a vast, silent presence in the outer reaches of space. A massive warship appeared on their monitors, a sleek, dark-hulled vessel of incomprehensible design, surrounded by a network of smaller, far more agile ships that appeared from nowhere. "Confirm visual on the target," Zim's communications officer said, his voice quivering. It looks like it's watching us." Valtros Zim's eyes narrowed. "This is a trap. Prepare tow." Before he could finish his command, a strange, deep rumble vibrated through the hull of the ship. The Crestfall shook violently, as if something immense and powerful had just stirred nearby. "Report," Zim demanded. "Incoming transmission." The officer replied, voice cracking. A cold, metallic voice filled the communication channels. "This is Admiral Ilara Voss of the Terran Accord. Your presence in this system is unauthorized. We extend you one warning. Leave now or face the consequences." Zim's face tightened. "You think you can threaten the Empire?" He sneered. "We are the heart of the galaxy. No one dares defy us." The Terran voice remained calm, almost indifferent. "You are the ones who are trespassing. You have no place here." Without warning, Zim ordered his fleet to launch a defensive strike. Dozens of Imperial warships engaged the Terran forces, their weapons flaring with deadly precision. But before they could even fire a second round, the Terran ships responded with terrifying speed. The first volley struck like a hammer, obliterating the lead Imperial vessel in a burst of blue-white light. Before the remaining ships could react, the Terran vessels dispersed into multiple trajectories, avoiding incoming fire with impossible agility. One by one, Imperial warships were cut down with surgical precision, their defenses overwhelmed. Zim watched in horror as his fleet was dismantled in real time, the sheer efficiency of the Terran assault leaving him speechless. "Retreat," he screamed, but the order came too late. The Terran fleet, relentless and unstoppable, had already secured their victory. Amid the chaos, Voss's voice echoed once again through the void. "This is your first and final lesson. We are not here to negotiate." The transmission ended. The battle was over in minutes. The Empire's once vaunted fleet had been reduced to wreckage, and not a single Terran vessel had been damaged. As the remnants of the Phyrexian fleet limped away in retreat, Zen was left to wonder, what kind of species had they truly encountered? In the wake of their crushing victory, the Terran fleet did not pause to celebrate. There was no time for that. Ilara Voss knew the Empire would respond. This wasn't just a minor setback for them. It was a humiliation, and when the Empire was humiliated, it retaliated with unparalleled fury. Within days, the Imperial High Command had mobilized one of the largest fleets ever assembled, a vengeance fleet. It was a terrifying display of military might, composed of dozens of dreadnoughts, star crushers, and the Empire's most advanced war machines. This fleet would not only wipe out the Terran presence, it would erase the very idea of defiance from the galaxy. Ilara Voss, however, was unfazed. From the command deck of the Apocalypse, her eyes cold as the void itself, she surveyed the approaching armada. The Leviathan was flanking them on one side, while the rest of the fleet, composed of sleek, shadowy vessels, positioned themselves with deadly precision. They were ready, not just to fight, but to test the very limits of the Empire's strength. "Admiral," a voice came from behind her. It was Commander Kale, her right hand. "The Empire's fleet is closing in. We'll be in range within the hour." Voss didn't turn. Her focus was locked on the incoming enemy. "We've waited long enough," she replied, voice steady. "Send the signal. Let them know we're not running." Kale hesitated for just a moment. "Understood." And then the signal went out, across the dark void of space. A single broadcast, simple and blunt. "Prepare to face your reckoning." The first shots were fired at close range. A barrage of searing energy bolts from the Empire's flagship aimed directly at the Apocalypse. The blast rang out across space, but Voss didn't flinch. The Terran shift shields absorbed the energy, and before the Imperial ships could react, the Apocalypse fired back, a precise quantum strike that tore through the flagship's hull like paper. What followed was chaos. The Empire's fleet, confident in their overwhelming numbers, struggled to process what was happening. The Terran vessels moved with unfathomable speed, darting around Imperial warships with the grace of predators. Some ships split into multiple smaller craft, swarming like living clouds of destruction, while others simply disappeared into subspace, reappearing a moment later at another point in the battle. Imperial warships fired their weapons, but it was as if the Terrans could predict every move. Weapons fire would miss, or be deflected by newly discovered kinetic fields, while Terran ships responded with devastating counterattacks. In less than an hour, the Empire's flagship was a smoking wreck, its weapon systems down, its engines disabled. The rest of the fleet, disoriented and scrambling, found themselves targeted with a coordinated onslaught. Every Imperial ship, no matter how large or technologically advanced, was systematically neutralized with pinpoint accuracy. No escape. No mercy. Zim's earlier warning echoed through the Terran commanders' minds. The Empire's might is invincible. But now, it was clear, the Terrans had just rewritten the rules of war. By the end of the battle, the Empire's once great fleet was reduced to a scattering of wreckage. Not a single Terran vessel had fallen. Ilara Voss stood at the helm, her voice cold as ever, even in victory. "Broadcast it to every corner of the galaxy. Let them know that the Empire's strength is nothing but a hollow threat. Let them know the Terran nightmare is just beginning." And the message went out across the stars. "We do not fear your Empire. We will be your end." The galaxy trembled in the wake of the Terran victory. News of the crushing defeat of the Empire's vengeance fleet spread like wildfire, carried on the winds of subspace communications. The Phyrexian Empire, which had ruled for millennia with iron-fisted tyranny, was suddenly revealed to be vulnerable. and across countless star systems, oppressed species began to rise. In the shadows of imperial worlds, resistance groups emerged, emboldened by the Terran's strength. Alien races that had long suffered under the boot of the Empire now saw a glimmer of hope. The galaxy that had once been the Empire's playground was suddenly teetering on the edge of revolution. At the imperial capital, on the throne world of Falrex, Emperor Tyrus, the leader of the Empire, paced in his war room, his face twisted with a mixture of disbelief and fury. The reports flooding in from the Imperial fleet were incomprehensible. Whole fleets had been wiped out, and not a single Terran ship had been lost. How is this possible? The Emperor spat, his voice thick with rage. What manner of weaponry do these humans wield? Your Majesty, one of his advisors spoke hesitantly. The Terrans, they do not fight as we do. Their ships are alive. Their weapons, unlike anything we've seen. It is as though their technology defies the very laws of physics. The Emperor clenched his fists, his eyes narrowing. I will not be humiliated again. Prepare the Solaris Project. We will launch our final weapon. The Solaris Project, a weapon of unimaginable power, was the Empire's last resort, a planet killer capable of reducing entire worlds to dust with a single strike. It was the Empire's crowning achievement in destruction. If it could destroy a planet, it could certainly crush this upstart human rebellion. But even as the Emperor's forces prepared the Solaris Project, something far more insidious was already in motion. The Terrans, with their unparalleled knowledge of the Empire's systems, had infiltrated Imperial networks months before the battle. Through sleeper agents planted across Imperial military installations, they had gathered invaluable intelligence. The Solaris Project would never fire. On a hidden Terran outpost far from Imperial detection, Admiral Ilara Voss received word that the Empire was readying its ultimate weapon. Her lips curved into a thin, cold smile. We'll make sure it never sees the light of day, she muttered. Simultaneously, across multiple Imperial-controlled worlds, rebellions erupted. Entire planets, once loyal to the Empire, now joined the Terrans' cause. Imperial supply lines were attacked, fleets disrupted, and resources drained. The Empire, already struggling to contain the Terran threat, found itself engaged in a war on multiple fronts. In the midst of this chaos, the Terran fleet, now a symbol of hope and strength, began to push deeper into Imperial space. They offered no mercy, but instead gave the galaxy an alternative: freedom. One by one, the occupied worlds began to fall under Terran protection. The Empire, in its arrogance, had not considered the possibility that its greatest fear would come not from the stars, but from the very species it had once ignored. The Thalrexian Empire had always been a giant, but giants could fall. And now, for the first time in millennia, the Empire was reeling. The Terrans, with their relentless determination and unmatched technology, had torn through Imperial space like a storm. Worlds once thought invulnerable had been liberated. Resistance movements flared up on every planet, and the Imperial fleets, stretched thin and losing morale, struggled to maintain control. On Falrex, the throne world itself, the Emperor's once imposing palace now stood as a monument to failure. In the Grand War Room, Emperor Tyrus sat in his throne, his gaunt face a mask of frustration. His fingers drummed against the cold obsidian of his seat, a sign of his growing impatience. The Solaris Project, the Empire's last hope for retaliation, was nearly complete. Yet even as the weapons preparations neared their final stages, a creeping sense of doubt gnawed at the Emperor's thoughts. Had he underestimated the Terrans? His most trusted advisors, once confident in the Empire's invincibility, now spoke in hushed tones. It was no longer a question of how to crush the Terran threat. It was a question of if they could. "My Emperor," said a low voice from across the room. It was General Irelos, a seasoned military leader who had commanded the Imperial legions for decades. "We are nearing the point of no return. We can no longer deny the truth. The Terrans will not stop. If we do not act, we risk the complete collapse of everything we've built." Tyrus lifted his head, staring at Irelos with unblinking eyes. "And you think I don't know that?" he hissed. "I've seen our empire unraveling, General, and I will not let it fall without one final strike." Irelos took a cautious step forward, his expression grim. "Then let us not waste any more time. The Solaris project is our only option. We must use it now, before the Terrans reach Thalrex itself." The Emperor's eyes narrowed as he weighed the decision. The Solaris project could destroy a planet. With it, the Terrans and all the rebel forces scattered across the galaxy would be obliterated in an instant. But something within Tyrus stirred, an unfamiliar feeling of hesitation. "Deploy it," he finally ordered, his voice cold but resolute. "Let's finish this once and for all." Meanwhile, far from the Emperor's war room, Admiral Ilara Voss stood in the heart of the Terran fleet, her gaze focused on the glowing stars ahead. The Empire had played its hand, and now it was time for the final act. The Terrans had already achieved far more than they had ever dreamed, but victory was within their reach if they could take down the heart of the Empire itself. "We move on Thalrex," Voss said, her voice sharp and unyielding. "Prepare the fleet for the final assault. The Empire will not survive this." Her orders rang through the fleet, and as the Terran ships readied themselves for what would be the decisive battle, the galaxy held its breath. The Empire's capital, its heart, its seat of power, would soon be at the mercy of the humans it had once disregarded. The journey to Thalrex, the throne world of the Empire, was swift. The Terran fleet, now a fearsome and unrelenting force, cut through Imperial space with surgical precision, bypassing defense systems, neutralizing outposts, and leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. They were on a collision course with the heart of the Empire itself. It was a final push, a strike to crush the very core of Thalrexian power. As the Terran fleet approached the planet, Ilara Voss stood on the bridge of the apocalypse, her eyes locked on the shimmering world below. Thalrex was a jewel of imperial might, its cities towering with monumental structures, its skies dominated by massive warships that dotted the atmosphere like dark clouds. It had once been the seat of absolute power. Now, it was the last bastion of an empire on the brink of collapse. "Admiral," Commander Kale said from the tactical station, "we have entered Thalrexian space. Their planetary defenses are active. Expect heavy resistance." Voss nodded, her expression unreadable. "Let them bring their best. We've faced worse." The Terran fleet slowed its advance, coming into a formation that sent a clear message: the Empire would fall this day. On the surface of Thalrex, Emperor Tyrus paced in his private chambers, the weight of impending defeat pressing heavily on him. The Solaris project was ready, but even as his military forces prepared for the inevitable Terran assault, he couldn't shake the gnawing doubt that had plagued him ever since the battle for the edge of Imperial space. A voice crackled through his communication terminal. It was General Irelos. "My Emperor, the Terrans have arrived. We are preparing the Solaris weapon for deployment. Shall we proceed?" Tyrus's jaw tightened. The decision had been made. The weapon would fire. But even as he gave the order, his thoughts lingered on the Terrans. How had they come so far? How had these humans, once a scattered species on a dying planet, managed to build a fleet so powerful? It was a question he couldn't answer, but one that haunted him nonetheless. Meanwhile, the Terran fleet began its final approach. They would not be deterred. "We've located their main defense grids," Kale reported, his voice steady but urgent. "Shields are up. Their planetary cannons are locking on." Voss's gaze was cold. "Activate the Eclipse Protocol. Let's end this." As the order was given, the Terran fleet shifted, each ship moving with eerie synchronization. Energy pulses rippled through the fleet, and suddenly, the solar system around Thalrex seemed to warp as if reality itself bent under the force of the eclipse, a technology only the Terrans had mastered. Ships blinked in and out of subspace, avoiding incoming fire with impossible agility. A series of pinpoint strikes blasted through Thalrexian defenses, knocking out the planetary shields. The Imperial fleet, desperate and disorganized, attempted to regroup, but the Terrans were already on the offensive. The Apocalypse fired a devastating quantum strike, sending shockwaves through the Emperor's defenses. "Time to finish this," Voss said, her voice low, but the determination was clear. The Solaris project was ready to fire, but the Terrans had a plan, one that would make sure it would never have the chance. The battle around Thalrex raged on, a violent symphony of explosions, laser fire, and shockwaves that tore through the once mighty defenses of the Empire. The Terran fleet moved with relentless efficiency, their ships striking like phantoms, slipping in and out of subspace, leaving no time for retaliation. The Emperor's greatest weapon, the Solaris project, loomed over them, but Ilara Voss had already anticipated this. She knew it would be the Empire's last stand, a desperate attempt to turn the tide. "Admiral," Commander Kale reported urgently, "we've pinpointed the Solaris project's launch site. It's hidden beneath the Imperial capital's surface, deep underground. We can't allow it to fire." Voss's expression remained unchanged. She'd known from the moment they entered Thalrexian space that the Empire would play its trump card. The Solaris project was more than just a weapon. It was a symbol of the Empire's ultimate arrogance, but now it would be their downfall. "Deploy the strike teams," Voss ordered. "We'll take it from the inside." With that, a series of sleek Terran stealth dropships launched from the fleet, disappearing into the atmosphere of Thalrex. Their mission was clear: disable the Solaris project before it could unleash its devastating power. The Emperor's desperation was palpable, but the Terrans were prepared for this moment. On the surface of Thalrex, the Terran strike teams infiltrated the heart of the capital, moving through the vast underground tunnels toward the weapon's core. The Empire's elite guards were caught off guard, their forces crumbling under the precision of the Terran commandos. Resistance was futile. As the Terrans closed in on the Solaris launch facility, Ilara Voss stood on the bridge of the Apocalypse, her eyes locked on the planet below. Victory was within their grasp, but she didn't celebrate. There was no joy in this. For her, this was a mission of survival, one that had come at a great cost. "I've got a lock," Kale said, his voice filled with anticipation. "The Solaris project is offline. It's over." Ilara's gaze hardened. "Not yet. Keep the pressure on the Imperial fleet. We're not letting them regroup." In the capital, the final battle was unfolding. The Solaris project had been disabled, its systems rendered inert by the Terran strike teams. The Empire's greatest weapon lay dormant, unable to fire, a relic of a time when they thought themselves invincible. The Terran commandos, with calculated precision, turned the facility's systems against the very Empire that had built it. Back on the bridge of the Apocalypse, Ilara Voss issued her final command: "End the battle. Target the Imperial capital." With that, the Terran fleet released a final salvo, a series of quantum torpedoes that struck with pinpoint accuracy, reducing the heart of the Empire to ruins. The once grand cities of Thalrex were reduced to ash, the monuments of Imperial might collapsing into the void. For a brief moment, the galaxy was silent. The Empire, the once unassailable colossus, had been broken. Ilara Voss stood motionless, watching the destruction unfold. She felt no triumph, no victory. The war had cost them all too much. The Terran Accord had fought to survive, and they had won. But the galaxy, now free of the Empire's shadow, would have to rebuild, something that would take years, perhaps centuries. But the message had been sent. The Terrans were not conquerors, they were survivors. And if anyone, anywhere, ever dared to threaten them again, they would face the full fury of the Terran nightmare.